29th August 1604, and it was first installed inside the Golden Temple on September 1st, 1604. And as we approach its anniversary, I'm so excited to have with us Sarbpreet Singh as we discuss his new book, The Story of the Sikhs, as you can see it here. And even though I'm not a Sikh, I absolutely loved reading the book. It has so much beautiful poetry. It is also a book that you don't want to skip read because it has amazing stories. And it goes through the account of how the Sikhs came into existence over a period of 400 years and rose to almost ruling all over India. And as we all know now, they're all over the world. Joining me today is Harjinder Singh Kukreja, who needs no introduction. He is such a huge influencer with millions of followers on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. He is also a restaurateur, a chocolatier, a philanthropist, and I'm so excited he's going to be joining me to host the conversation today. And of course, we've got with us the author of this wonderful book. We've got Sarbpreet Singh. He's a writer, he's a podcaster, and he's a commentator. He's also the critically acclaimed author of The Night of the Restless Spirits and the best-selling book, The Camel Merchant of Philadelphia, and the writer-narrator of the Story of the Sikhs podcast, which has listeners in over 90 countries. By the way, this book, if I am capturing it correctly, was also envisioned as a podcast, but has also been turned into a lovely book. Wow. So first of all, welcome Sarbpreet and Harjinder to Sipping Thoughts. So excited to have both of you here today.
Thank you. It's absolutely a pleasure to be here.
Harjinder, it's absolutely my pleasure to also welcome you, and I am so glad to have you kick us off.
It's an honor to be a part of this panel and have this book discussion. It's an honor to be in this space and talk about such a pious book and such pious work that Sarbpreet ji has been doing. And yeah, look forward.
Thank you.
So I want to kick it off with a question that, you're following in some big footsteps. You've had Khushwant Singh, who wrote about the Sikh history. What new perspective were you hoping to bring when you wrote this book?
So Khushwant Singh's 2-volume History of the Sikhs is an absolutely wonderful work, and one of the first books on Sikhism that I myself engaged with as a young man. Partly out of necessity, because having been raised in Sikkim, very far from the Sikh homeland in Punjab, I grew up not knowing how to read and write Gurmukhi. So English was the only language that I could read. And Sardar Khushwant Singh's books were among the first that I read, and they are absolutely wonderful. This book and the volumes that are going to follow it, because this is the first of a multi-volume series, are written with a very specific perspective. Even though the book is meticulously researched, I would say that I see it more as a work of literature rather than a work of history. And why do I say that? Well, I see myself primarily as a storyteller, and this book is squarely written from the perspective of a storyteller rather than a historian. I had a couple of agendas while putting this book together. One of them was that I wanted to make this book very accessible and very engaging. And let me sort of elaborate on that a little. For several years, in the context of my local Gurdwara, both in New Jersey when we lived there and here in Massachusetts, I taught teenagers Sikh history and Sikh sacred music, or Gurmat Sangeet. Now, teaching history to teenagers teaching history to anyone is challenging, but teaching history to teenagers is particularly challenging because, with events and dates and personalities, it can get confusing and it can get a little boring. So I set out to write something that would really engage the interest of young people. So in that sense, this is different from Sardar Khushwant Singh's work because the emphasis is very much on storytelling. The second key difference is that, as a practicing Sikh myself, I am very sort of moved by the poetry of the Sri Guru Granth Sahib, the Sikh scripture, I have also had the good fortune to engage with a lot of other Sikh literature, quote unquote, separate from the scripture. Examples of these are the Dasam Granth, which is associated with the 10th Guru, Guru Gobind Singh, several works of poetry in Brajbhasha, such as the Gurpratap Suraj Granth, which is colloquially known as the Suraj Prakash, written by Kavi Santokh Singh, the Gurbilas literature, which is also poetic and written in Brajbhasha, and then other works such as Chandrasen's Gursoba, the first biography of Guru Gobind Singh. Now, a lot of this work is lost to modern readers and particularly to young readers. A lot of it is in Brajbhasha, for instance. So one of the unique features of this book is there are a lot of translations of poetry, both from the Sikh scripture and a lot of the other sources that I mentioned. And the purpose of this is to give my readers a sense, at least, of the richness and beauty of this poetry. And it is absolutely my fond hope that some of them at least will go read this poetry in the original. So those, I would say, are the key points of differences between most histories of the Sikhs, including Khushwant Singh's, and the one that I've just written.
Beautifully said, because your storytelling and your poetry is absolutely brilliant. Over to you, Harjinder.
Thank you.
So Sarbpreet ji, Sikhism could be the only world religion. It says that their faith is only one of the many ways to live life and realize God. According to Sikhism, God doesn't discriminate. God doesn't care. Waheguru doesn't care whether or not you're a Sikh. What are your comments about this? And where in the book have you addressed and showcased that aspect of Sikhism?
So this particular aspect of Sikhism is particularly important to me personally, and I will explain why. If I could be facetious for just a second, one of my young proteges, who is around my daughter's age and one of the brightest young fellows that I've ever had the good fortune to meet, when he first heard a couple of episodes of my podcast, which closely tracks the book, says, "You know what? I love your work, but you almost seem to have turned Guru Nanak into a secular humanist," which made me chuckle a little. So this is a very personal take on Sikhi, and I have absolutely emphasized those elements of the faith and the history that appeal to me personally. And I think if I step back and look at everything that's in the book, the one aspect of Guru Nanak Sahib's personality that personally appeals to me is his universalism. It's his refusal to judge. It's his lack of interest in proselytizing. Guru Nanak Sahib didn't go around telling people, become Sikhs, become my followers. No, he told Hindus to be good Hindus, and he told Muslims to live their lives as good Muslims. So this broad, universal worldview that permeates Guru Nanak Sahib's message, you will find throughout the book. I talk about the fact that Guru Nanak Sahib was never interested in proselytizing, the kindness of the gurus, not just Guru Nanak, but all the gurus who were animated by the very same light that animated him, is emphasized over and over. And even when we talk about the battles of Guru Hargobind, or we talk about the battles of Guru Gobind Singh, this strain of compassion that comes directly from Guru Nanak Sahib is seen as an example when Guru Hargobind cradles the dying Pende Khan's head after having delivered the last blow to him. And when Guru Gobind Singh, after having fought with Aurangzeb and having lost his entire family, befriends his son Bahadur Shah, that is the same universal worldview of Guru Nanak Sahib talking, where justice, compassion trump everything else. Now, very directly to answer your question, in the chapter about the creating of the Khalsa, I go at great lengths to talk about Sikh identity, and we talk about Khalsa identity and Amrit. Now, as an Amritdhari or initiated Sikh myself, I firmly believe that the gift of Amrit and the Khalsa Rehat or the Khalsa way of life was bequeathed by Guru Gobind Singh to all of his followers. That said, I am fiercely opposed to any form of judgment. And that to me goes exactly to the question that you asked about Guru Nanak Sahib. While I firmly reiterate that the Rehat is for all Sikhs, in the same breath, I also say, shame upon any Sikh who judges the Sikhi of another Sikh. So
Wow.
all this goes to the worldview of Guru Nanak Sahib. Thank you for asking that question. It's very, very close to my heart.
Got it. So thank you for using all your knowledge to highlight the beauty of Sikhism. Like we can't be more grateful enough
Thank
to you for what
That's
you're
very
doing.
kind.
Over to you, Sukirti.
So I think one of the questions that always comes up, and especially for the lay people, is the influence of Hinduism and Islam on Sikhism.
Mhm.
And how are they interlinked or are they very separate? Because there's a lot of confusion as to how did Sikhism arise and did it come from Hinduism or Islam, or was it a blend of the two, or was it something new?
Brilliant question. It's no accident that this confusion exists. And the reason for this confusion, is complex. Now, first of all, you have the Sikh scripture, the Guru Granth Sahib, which has the writings of 6 of the Gurus, and then it has the writings of several Hindu saints, and it also has writings of several Muslim saints. So a somewhat banal sort of reading of that could be, oh, there are hymns from Hindu thought and there are hymns from Muslim writers, so surely Sikhism must be an amalgam of these two faiths. I mean, I would say that that's a very unsophisticated reading of Sikhism, and unfortunately several Western scholars fell prey to that as well. And you had this theory that Sikhism was really an amalgam of Islam and Hinduism, which it clearly is not. And this is not to, knock Hinduism or knock Islam. Both of those are, great faiths with traditions that go back hundreds and hundreds of years. But the fact of the matter is that Guru Nanak Sahib, from the moment that he had his spiritual epiphany, was building a new faith brick by brick. And this was a faith that had been revealed to him. In the Sikh tradition, there is no confusion about this at all. Let me elaborate a little because this is an important question. Now, it's important to realize that some of the things that we greatly admire about Guru Nanak Sahib, he was not the first to articulate them. For example, Guru Nanak Sahib was absolutely opposed to caste discrimination. And his writings embody his opposition to that. The institutions he created embody that. But there were other thinkers before him who similarly railed at the inequities and the oppression of caste. Bhagat Kabir is an example. Bhagat Namdev is an example. But what was the difference? The difference was that Guru Nanak Sahib was not content with merely articulating his opposition to caste discrimination. To use one example, he created institutions that were designed to drive a stake through the heart of this form of discrimination. The most notable of these being langar. And, let me elaborate because this is an important point. Caste discrimination was rampant in the time of Guru Nanak Sahib. And one of the ways in which it was enforced was through commensality. So commensality is this whole set of rules and regulations and social norms when it comes to the preparing and sharing of food. So if there was a wedding, for instance, and if people of all castes were invited, the Brahmins would have their own section, the Kshatris would have their own section, and so on. All these sections would be separated, and each group of people would eat with their own caste. Why? Because if you ate with a lower caste, you would lose caste, you would get ostracized. So Guru Nanak Sahib created this brilliant institution called Guru Ka Langar, or the communal kitchen that the whole world knows about, where everyone before being admitted to the Guru's presence had to sit and eat with no regard and no knowledge of the caste of the person to their left or the caste of the person to the right. This was the key difference between Guru Nanak Sahib and some of the other religious leaders whose philosophy might be similar to his. He created institutions that were designed to fight the ills that he saw in society. The other big difference, Kabir was a great mystic and religious leader, and of course, his writings are also contained in the Guru Granth Sahib. After Kabir passed, there was no Kabir II. But after Guru Nanak passed, there was a Nanak II, which was Guru Angad, and there was a Nanak III, which was Guru Amar Das, and so on. So the important point over here is that the guruship the Guru went from being a person in Guru Nanak's time to being an institution. Now, Guru Nanak wandered for several years. The book talks about his travels that are known as the Udasis. And then in his last years, he settled down in Kartarpur, and then followed many, many years of institution building. The subsequent gurus who followed Guru Nanak Sahib continued this trend. Guru Arjan Sahib created several institutions in his lifetime, including the Sri Harmandir Sahib, including the Guru Granth Sahib, the Sikh scripture, including the tradition in Sikhism of fighting tyranny, which he created by giving up his own life. Guru Hargobind continued that with the creation of the Akal Takht and the principle of Miri Piri, or temporal power and spiritual power. So as you can see, throughout the lifetimes of the gurus, there was this step-by-step meticulous building of a new religion. This is one aspect that we can understand very well. A second aspect that is even more profound is in the writings of the Guru. There is absolutely no doubt in the minds of anyone, based on the writings of the Gurus themselves, that they were divinely inspired. In one of his shabads, Guru Nanak Sahib, and this is translated in the book, says, Jaisi mein aave qasam ki bani teh sada kari gyan ve lalo. So he's addressing Pai Lalo, one of his humble disciples, and saying, as the Almighty's words come to me, that is how I utter them. So Guru Nanak Sahib himself is talking about the fact that he is divinely inspired. So Kriti, to answer your question then very, very directly, while Guru Nanak Sahib had tremendous respect for the Hindu faith and had tremendous respect for the Muslim faith, despite the fact that he was fighting the ills that he saw in society at that time, his inspiration came directly from the divine. And finally, the one important point to emphasize, which is emphasized in the book as well, is that in the Sikh tradition, there is no difference between Guru Nanak Sahib and Guru Gobind Singh. In fact, two of the bards of the court of Guru Angad, Satta and Balwand, who wrote a ballad called the Satta Balwand Di Var, which appears in the Guru Granth Sahib, talk about the light transferring from Guru Nanak Sahib to Guru Gobind Singh, to Guru Angad. And then Senapati, one of the 52 poets in Guru Gobind Singh's court, and one of his biographers, also in the Gursoba, writes the same thing. I'll paraphrase rather than reading the excerpt. He says, "Tu hi Nanak, tu hi Angad, tu hi Amardas," all the way to Guru Gobind Singh, thus reiterating this tradition and belief within the Sikh faith that all the gurus up to the Guru Granth Sahib were linked. The wisdom came from Guru Nanak, and it was divinely inspired. Thus, modern scholars, as opposed to early Western scholars, absolutely and unequivocally subscribe to the fact that Sikhism is an independent religion which had its own revelation, and the prophets of the religion, the gurus, themselves clearly talked about this connection to the divine. I'm sorry for that long-winded answer, but you really asked a very pertinent and an excellent
and I think a very important question, because that question does arise all the time. So back to you, Harjinder.
So this question was beautifully answered by you, Sarbpreet ji. Also, like Turki Bani Ai, then Sagli Chint Mitai. Like,
there you go.
The Bani was revealed from Vaheguru himself. Exactly. And also when Guru Gobind Singh Ji made the Khalsa, he said, "Agya pai akal ki, tabe chalayo panth." It's like It's the hukam of Vaheguru himself. So the panth is now being created.
Absolutely.
So you have so well explained the whole idea of how Sikhism is a beautiful, independent faith which respects and loves all other faiths, and yet it is completely independent of any other faith. So the question that I would really like to ask you is, Guru Arjan Dev Ji became the 5th Guru of Sikhism. He built the world famous Darbar Sahib, the Harjinder Sahib, popularly known as Golden Temple in Amritsar. He also compiled the Holy Guru Granth Sahib. So what was the importance of the Guru Granth Sahib being installed at Darbar Sahib? Like, it could have been at Nankana Sahib as well. So why, like, the Guru chose Darbar Sahib, and what is the relevance of Darbar Sahib to the Sikhs? Why do they say it's the holiest site of the Sikhs?
Again, an excellent question. So in line with their opposition to anything that had to do with superstition, the gurus in their lifetimes decreed that the concept of pilgrimage was alien to the Sikh ethos. And what I mean by that is, you can't go to the Sri Harjinder Sahib and take a bath in the pool and wash your sins away. I mean, it's a wonderful thing to do, but you have to live the right kind of life. And that's what's going to take care of, your sins, misdeeds, whatever you want to call them. That said, the Sri Harjinder Sahib occupies a very, very special place in Sikhism. Obviously, in popular culture, it is the most enduring and well-known symbol of the Sikh faith. And if you look at the history of the Sikh faith, both in the times of the gurus and in the centuries that have followed, its history is completely linked to the history of all Sikhs. So in that sense, it is tremendously important. Now, there were several important things about the Sri Harjinder Sahib. Nankana Sahib is very important, and we love Nankana Sahib because it was the birthplace of Guru Nanak Sahib, and we should. Sri Harjinder Sahib was important for a couple of reasons. One, it was called a mandir, a temple, and mandirs are traditionally Hindu places of worship, which are usually dedicated to a particular deity or a particular god. Well, the Harjinder Sahib was a temple that was dedicated to the one Vaheguru, or the one divine. So that was a key difference at the time. The Harjinder Sahib was built on land which was lower than the land that surrounded it, which signified humility. The Harjinder Sahib was built with 4 doors, which signified that everyone from all four directions was welcome to enter. And most importantly, the four castes were all welcome to enter. So it was really a physical manifestation of the philosophy of Guru Nanak Sahib. That's the reason why the Sri Harmandir Sahib was so fundamentally important. Setting aside all the cultural connotations and the importance that the Sikhs ascribe to the Golden Temple very rightly, because of the reasons that I articulated, it is truly the heart of Sikhism. Now, as far as why Guru Arjan Sahib chose to install the Guru Granth Sahib there, some things will always remain a mystery. The workings of the Guru's mind are not something that we mortals can easily understand. But if we try to intellectualize, we could perhaps speculate that for all of these reasons that made the Sri Harmandir Sahib so unique, it was the perfect place to install the scripture, which eventually would become the spiritual guru of the Sikhs.
Thank you so much for beautifully letting us know how important the Darbar Sahib, the Golden Temple, is for us. Over to you, Sokirti.
Now, I'm going to ask a question. Of course, I have to ask this because we talk about Sikhism and everybody being equal. And even women are supposed to be equal, but there are no female gurus. So why is that? And what is the explanation? Because there's a lot of talk about equality.
Indeed, indeed. So the first thing to emphasize is that the talk about equality was never just talk. We have to go back 500 years and try to imagine the situation and the context that the gurus lived in. Now, the book talks about the status of women in those times. It talks about the wergeld, or the worth of a woman, regardless of whether she was a Brahmin woman, the mother of a king. Her wergeld was equal to that of a so-called low caste Shudra. This was sanctified, codified, and practiced. Guru Nanak Sahib recognized the tyranny of discrimination, whether it was caste discrimination or whether it was gender discrimination, from a very, very young age. There's the famous story about his ceremony when he was coming from a Kshatriya household. He was to be invested with the Janeu, and he refused. And one of the questions that he asked the family Pandit was that, Panditji, can my sister get this? And the answer was no. And that went into the opposition that he articulated. Guru Nanak Sahib in the Asa Divar writes powerfully about gender equality. And then the gurus who followed him absolutely and unequivocally acted on those principles. So when the faith was organized, after Guru Nanak's travel, there were communities of Sikhs in far-flung places who needed to be ministered to. So when ministers were sent to these far-flung places, several of them were women. There were practices that the third Guru, Guru Amar Das, prohibited. Sati was practiced in those days. He prohibited it. Widows were not allowed to remarry. He absolutely encouraged his followers to remarry widows. So the point is that the gurus didn't just talk about equality, they put into place practices to implement that equality. And then the effect of that can be seen in the centuries that followed, where women attained positions of great prominence and respect within the Sikh faith. But let me not get lost in happy talk. It's important to acknowledge that the baggage of the patriarchy that we carry in the Indian subcontinent has not been shed completely by the Sikhs either. And I would say that arguably the Sikhs should have been even more progressive when it came to gender equality. But even in today's world, we do see that the overarching majority of Sikh leaders happen to be men. So the important thing to focus on is that the ideals of Guru Nanak Sahib are 500 years old, and a lot of the baggage that all of us, including several of us Sikhs, carry is thousands of years old. So we haven't completely got rid of it. Now, to get back to your question very directly, some things will always remain metaphysical mysteries. And the reason for that is we can't get into the minds of the gurus and understand what was going on in their heads when they were deciding who would follow after them. There is this story about Bibi Pani, the daughter of Guru
Yes.
Amar Das and the wife of the Guru to be, Guru Ram Das, which is recounted in the book, which talks about how the gurus were chosen and how the method of succession changed in a certain sense after the third guru. The important thing for us to focus on is, the same question could be asked and has been asked: why were there no quote unquote low caste Sikh gurus? Why was nobody drawn from the lowest reaches of society? The answer again is it will forever remain a mystery. I think that those of us who believe in the gurus are always assured that they made the right decision at their time. And the important thing for us to focus on is that it is clear and unequivocal based on their actions that their commitment to equality, whether it was gender equality or whether it was caste equality, was not just talk. They were far ahead of their time, and it's their actions that we must focus on. And unfortunately, some mysteries will always remain mysteries. We can speculate, we can rationalize, but those of us who are practicing Sikhs at some level will always accept, and that's what we have to do.
No, thank you for explaining that, because that was a question that arose in my mind.
Of
Back to you,
course.
Harjinder.
Yeah. So the next question that I want to ask you is, Sikhism is synonymous to humanism. It is an amazing experience to being a human being in being a Sikh. So being a Sikh implies being a good human. And I want to know your comments on being a good human and being a Sikh. So to put it simply, a lot of people say, what is the use of the beard and the turban if you're not a good human being? So how would you address to that? Like, someone may be looking like a Sikh, but may not be a good human being or doing all the bad things. So uh, how important it is to be both together and also, yeah, just like that, yeah. Your
Great
comments.
question. Great question again. These are the kinds of things that I discussed with my teenagers in my Sikh history class for years and years, because young people question, and they are right to question. When a Sikh boy, I grew up in Sikkim, and I know how difficult it was to maintain my identity growing up, because children can be very cruel. And when anybody looks different, there are all kinds of consequences that flow from that. And certainly I have dealt with that in abundance, having lived in the West for several years, where our children often grow up in very hostile environments because of their physical identity. It's a very, very legitimate question, and one that I have also been debating with several of my friends who don't maintain the physical form of a Sikh over the years. And I'm very, very happy to talk about it. So, the first thing to understand and internalize is that at the end of the day, the most important thing are your actions. There is no doubt about that. Looking like a practicing Sikh is important, but being a practicing Sikh, which to me is somebody who embodies the values that you talked about that we subscribe to, there is no doubt in my mind that that is absolutely, unequivocally fundamental and most important. No doubt about it. Moving on from there, Sikhism is a faith which has a certain set of principles. First and foremost, if somebody calls themselves a Sikh and they subscribe to the teachings of the Gurus, believing 90% in Guru Nanak and 10% in Guru Gobind Singh is not an option. I'm being tongue-in-cheek, I'm being half facetious, but this is not a buffet. You know, you can't walk up to the buffet and pick the things that appeal to you for whatever reason and say, oh, the other things I really don't care about. Make no mistake, Sikhism is a faith. It has a way of life. It has a code of conduct, which was codified by Guru Gobind Singh. Where did it come from? It came from Guru Nanak. Why do I say that? To me, there is no difference between Guru Nanak and Guru Gobind Singh. Why do I say that? This is an important thing to ponder, and it goes to the heart of your question, Harjinder ji. So let me elaborate a little. The world has dichotomized the Sikh gurus to some extent. What do I mean by that? Think about the image that pops in your mind when you think about Guru Nanak Sahib. You think of a holy man, maybe old, with a white beard, a very calm expression on his face, the prophet of peace. What comes to mind when you think of Guru Gobind Singh? You think about a young warrior with a jet black beard, a sword strapped on, a quiver of arrows slung behind his back. This dichotomy is false, completely false. Guru Gobind Singh was no less spiritual than Guru Nanak Sahib. The evidence? You have to look at his writings. You have to look at the writings that are part of the Sikh liturgy, such as the Jap Sahib, the Savaye, and several other writings that are, unequivocally accepted as being the work of Guru Gobind Singh. There is no difference between his view from a spiritual perspective and the view of Guru Nanak Sahib. Let's turn it around now. Let's talk about the sword of Guru Gobind Singh. How can I say that Guru Nanak and Guru Gobind are the same, Guru Gobind Singh are the same, when Guru Nanak Sahib is shown with a rosary or beads and Guru Gobind Singh is shown with a sword? Well, go back. Chapter 3 of the book talks about this in some detail. Go back to the time when Guru Nanak Sahib is returning from Mecca. He is in Sayyidpur visiting with the same humble follower, Pai Lallo, and there he sees what Babur, who has not yet established the Mughal Empire, he's on his way to doing it, has perpetrated in Sayyidpur. A terrible massacre has taken place. Thousands of people have been killed, women have been molested, there are heaps of corpses, blood is flowing in the drains of Sayyidpur. What does Guru Nanak Sahib do? He roars in rage, he confronts Babur and he says to his face, "You're a tyrant." Imagine how much courage that must have taken. Did it take any less courage than it took to confront Aurangzeb or Wazir Khan or the Hill Rajas as Guru Gobind Singh Ji did? The question is rhetorical. No, it took exactly the same courage, maybe even greater courage. To me, the cry of anguish of Guru Nanak Sahib when he berated Babur for his atrocities is nothing other than the sword of Guru Gobind Singh. The kirpan of Guru Gobind Singh is nothing but the physical manifestation of Guru Nanak's cry that tyranny must be opposed. That's the reason why the Sikh faith is not a buffet and it's a package. You absolutely have to embrace it in its entirety. There have been a few Western scholars in particular who have challenged the modern Khalsa identity. And, they had their reasons for doing it. Their argument essentially has been that there was a rupture in the Sikh faith in the time of Guru Hargobind and then at the time of Guru Gobind Singh, where a peaceful religion was turned into a militant direction. This is hogwash. This is absolute nonsense. There was no rupture. The philosophy was always the same. The means were different depending on the time. And I'm delighted that several modern scholars have addressed this very effectively, and I will mention two of them. One of them is Dr. Ami P. Shah, who got her PhD in the US at UC Santa Barbara. And in her doctoral dissertation, which also includes a translation of Senapati's Gursoba, she writes about this unity of thought. Similarly, Karamjit Kaur Malhotra, who is a researcher in India, has written very powerfully about how the Sikh way of life and the Sikh code of conduct, to get to your question, Harjinderji, about the identity, the physical identity, all of that derived and was created in the time of the Gurus and was derived from the writings of the Gurus and the teachings of the Gurus. So it is absolutely clear and unequivocal that while the first thing is living the good life, right on its heels follows the command of the Guru, which is the identity and the code of conduct. Both are equally important, and you cannot just sort of pick and choose between one and the other. Having said that, there is something equally important that I must articulate. Even though I am an initiated or Amritari Sikh who follows or tries to follow the command of the Gurus as I see it embodied in the Sikh code of conduct, I feel that it is absolutely unconscionable for me to judge the Sikhness, quote unquote, of another Sikh. Not my job. Why do I say that? Guru Nanak Sahib himself freed us from intermediaries. There is no concept of clergy in Sikhism. Every Sikh is directly connected to the Guru and directly connected to the divine. So very specifically to answer your question, Harjinderji, I believe that every Sikh has his or her own relationship with the Guru. It's not for me or anybody else to judge that relationship. Whether they wear a turban or whether their beard is unshorn, ultimately is between them and the Guru, not for anyone else to judge. From the point of view of the faith, it is absolutely clear and articulate that living a life of high ideals, according to the philosophy of Guru Nanak Sahib, is important. Subscribing to the identity that the faith gives you is equally important, and not judging is no less important. So again, sorry for the long answer, but this is something that I'm very passionate about.
Like, you have so much knowledge. I think it'll be unfair
no.
if you don't start your own YouTube channel where you can answer questions about the Sikh faith. You're not just the author of this book, but you're so full of knowledge, and immediately you're there with an answer, so perfectly crafted answer.
That's very kind. That's very kind. But I have to emphasize that I don't see myself that way at all. My practice of my faith is flawed in many ways, and I'm not just trying to be modest. I'm trying to be very, very honest. But you know what? I think that's okay. The only perfect beings are the ones who inspire us. We can only aspire. I can definitely tell you that I am an aspirant. There is no question about that. But thank you for the kind words.
I would like to ask you one more question, which is
Please.
related to the previous question. That is, if you could please explain us, like, how do we categorize people who practice Sikhism but not fully? They practice other faiths as well. Like the Sindhis, they believe in Guru Nanak, but they have kind of picked and chosen and consider Sikhism as a buffet. They are lovely people, but they think differently than us. Are they Sikhs? Who qualifies to be a Sikh and who doesn't? Like, it's a very difficult question, but if you could just tell us, like, there's something called Guru Nanak Naam Leva Sangat, and what is the difference between, can there be people who choose not to wear the turban and yet be Sikhs? What's the difference between them and the Khalsa?
So I will answer this question in an abstract manner. The question that you asked has many, many implications. Now, if I were somebody whose concern was census, counting, demographics, population, maybe my view would be very, very different. I am a Sikh who subscribes to the philosophy of Guru Nanak Sahib, which, as I've articulated earlier, is the philosophy of all the gurus. If there is one thing that defined Guru Nanak, it was his expansive worldview. That worldview was echoed and indeed lived by all the gurus that followed Guru Nanak Sahib. So my heart tells me, I'm nobody to arbitrate who is a Sikh and who is not a Sikh. I can only tell you what I believe. I believe that if somebody subscribes to these ideals of Guru Nanak and the gurus, he or she is a Sikh. And nobody should dare to deny them that. How can they? If I were to answer your question in a more mundane manner, I know many practicing Hindus and Muslims and Christians and Jews who are better Sikhs than I am based on how they lead their lives. Many years ago, I wrote an article about Pope Francis. And, I sort of used the Bani of Guru Tegh Bahadur to talk about the personality of the Pope. And to me, he seemed to embody the attributes of a Sikh. So if you'll indulge me for waxing philosophical for a second, I think that while I am unequivocal in reiterating that the Rahat of the Sikhs is fundamentally important, I think it would be criminal to point to a Sindhi who loves Guru Nanak Sahib no less than I do and say, you know what? Your adherence to the Sikh faith is lesser than mine. I can't do that. If I did that, I feel I would be betraying the principles of Guru Nanak Sahib. So Harjinder ji, I can only speak for myself. And as far as I'm concerned, anyone who believes in Guru Nanak Sahib's philosophy, anyone who believes that they are a Sikh of Guru Nanak, are a Sikh. Who am I to tell them anything different?
Wow. So thank you for answering this. Thank you. Over to you, Suketi.
So now I know that, like Harjinder said, there's so many questions. We would take hours to go through it, but I think I will close with my last question. So there are about 24 million Sikhs worldwide, but their impact, when I read the number, I said that seems so small because their impact is so vast. And almost anywhere you go, you can find a Gurudwara and you can get a langar. And in COVID times, we also saw the community come together with the oxygen langar, which made news worldwide. What has kept the community so strongly together?
So many things, I would say. First and foremost, it's the philosophy of the gurus. There is no question, absolutely, unequivocally. Go back to the times of the gurus and try to imagine society as a pyramid, right? So you had this caste-based pyramid where the highest caste sat at the top and the vast majority sat at the bottom. You have a faith which suddenly wants to turn the apple cart over, which says, you know what? This hierarchy is nonsense. Everyone is equal. Who do you think this philosophy appealed to the most? The people at the top of the pyramid? No, no, no. People at the bottom of the pyramid, many of whom had been subjected to institutionalized discrimination for generations upon generations upon generations, which results in trauma, which results in a very low sense of self-esteem. Guru Gobind Singh passes away in 1708. There are quite a few Sikhs at that time. All of a sudden, they are left leaderless. The centuries that follow are times of great turmoil. The Mughal Empire is starting to decline. Ahmad Shah Abdali takes power in Afghanistan after the death of Nader Shah of Persia and launches invasion after invasion targeting northern India and in particular the Punjab. The Sikhs undergo terrible repression under governors like Zakaria Khan and Mir Mannu. These things, by the way, will be in the next volume of the story of the Sikhs. The 18th century, the time after the passing of Guru Gobind Singh, to me, is the crucible in which the character of the Sikhs was really created. Sikhs had to pass through tremendous trials during those decades. There were these two great holocausts. In the second Holocaust, by various estimates, 1762, perpetrated by Ahmad Shah Abdali, where maybe 40% of the entire Sikh population was decimated in one day. Those were the kinds of trials and tribulations that the Sikhs had to go through. Given the fact that this was happening actively in the 1700s, the Great Holocaust was 1762, it was nothing less than a miracle that just 40 years later, the Sikhs went on to establish the largest empire in northern India, the only empire that could stand up to the might of the British East India Company. This is exactly the question that you asked. How did it happen? It looked like a miracle. Well, the Pahul, or the initiation that Guru Gobind Singh gave to his Sikhs on that day on Vaisakhi in 1699, which again was an embodiment of everything that Guru Nanak Sahib stood for, infused such a spirit in the Sikhs that those very people who had been the lowest of the low for generations upon generations, each one of them started seeing himself or herself as a chief. And very improbably, just 100 years later, they became the masters of unimaginable political power. It was this exact same spirit that animates Sikhs today. And to the extent that we see Sikhs doing good in the world, absolutely unequivocally, it accrues from the philosophy of the Gurus, it accrues from the lives of the Gurus, it accrues from the sacrifices of the Gurus and the sacrifices of the Sikhs who followed them, particularly in the 18th century. That is the bedrock that the character of modern Sikhs is built upon.
Well, we're going to wait for your next book, but Harjinder, I'd like to get your closing thoughts, and then I'll take Sarbpreet's closing thoughts. You're muted, Harjinder.
Sorry. So enough of the questions that we've been asking you. Can we request you to please read about from the book, Guru Nanak's travel to Jagannath Temple from chapter 2. It would be amazing if you can read it for us.
Sure, it would absolutely be my pleasure. So to set up the context for this reading, chapters 2 and 3 of the book in particular talk about the travels of Guru Nanak Sahib before he settled down in Kartarpur. So the excerpt that I am reading is about Guru Nanak Sahib's visit to the celebrated temple of Jagannath in Puri. So Guru Nanak Sahib traveled to the far reaches of the Indian subcontinent and then all the way to Mecca. And certainly, one of the things that he absolutely intended to do and did was to engage scholars of various spiritual traditions in dialogue. So this is the story about Guru Nanak Sahib's visit to the temple of Jagannath. Nanak and Mardana arrived in Puri and, of course, went to pay their respects at the temple of Jagannath. It was dusk, and devotees had gathered in the temple. Nanak and Mardana tried to enter the temple, but were stopped by a group of haughty Brahmins, suspicious perhaps of their caste origins and Nanak's odd accoutrements. Nanak calmly seated himself on a platform by the temple. The Janam Sakhi account suggests that the priests were unable to complete their evening rituals and were upbraided by their deity for denying a most holy man entrance. Realizing their error, they rushed to Nanak and apologized profusely, begging him to enter the temple. Nanak, now standing with the rest of the pilgrims, took in the wonderful spectacle. The lamps were lit, and Nanak was invited by the high priest to stand up and join in the worship, which was grand and imposing. Opulent offerings to Jagannath were made on silver salvers studded with pearls. On the salvers were fragrant flowers and censers from which rose the sweet smell of incense. The beautiful temple was illuminated by the light of the flickering lamps, but Nanak seemed unmoved by the beauty. He was in a deep reverie. The priests, disappointed at Nanak's aloofness and his seeming rebuff, asked him why he hadn't participated in the worship. Then he spoke. गगन में थाल रव चंद दीपक बने तारका मंडल जनक मोती धूप मन आन लो पवन चवरो करे सगल बन राय फूलंत ज्योति कैसी आरती होवे भव खंडना तेरी आरती अनहता शब्द वाजंत भेरी सहस तव नैन नन नैन है तोए को सहस मूरत नना एक तोए सहस पद बिमल नन एक पद गंध बिन सहस तव गंध इव चलत मोहे सब में जोत जोत है सोए तिस दे चानन सब में चानन होए गुरसा की जोत प्रगट होए जो तिस भावे सो आरती होए हर चरण कमल मकरंद लोभित मनो अंदनो मोहे आए प्यासा कृपा जल दे नानक सारंग को होए जाते तेरे नाय वासा. The firmament is thy salver, the sun and moon lamps thine. The pearls that your salver adorn, stars that brightly shine, the scent of fragrant, verdant trees, no censer smells so sweet. Thy fan, the wind and flowers' lamps, O nature's glorious feet. How shall I pray to you, my Lord, salvation of the world? To the strains of unstruck hallowed sound, your worship does unfurl. 1,000 eyes and yet not one, 1,000 forms yet you have none, 1,000 feet, 1,000 noses, yet not one in sight. I am by your miracles struck by wonder and delight. In every being, you are the light. With your light illumined are all. Only the ones that are blessed worship, wrapped, Lord, in your thrall. For your grace, my Lord, I thirst. I seek it thus, Lord, every day. Bless Nanak with your mercy, Lord, steadfast in your name to stay. Nanak was not being disdainful of the worship in the temple or disrespectful in the very least. He was a kind man who would never scorn devotion. He had, however, been transported. The worship of the idol Jagannath, despite the pomp and the pageantry, to him was banal. It was empty. It was small. For in Nanak's mind, all of nature was in a perpetual state of worship, not to an idol, but to its ineffable Lord.
Thank you. That was so beautiful. And I think what a perfect way to end our session for today. I'd like to say thank you to Harjinder and thank you, Sarbpreet. And we're looking forward to your next book eagerly also.
Thank you so much for having me. It was absolutely a pleasure. And Sukirti and Harjinderji, both of you, thank you so much for your wonderful questions, which made for a most engaging conversation.